I don't know if you guys are using this yet, but the new search features in SwiftUI are awesome. We're going to cover all of them in this video. So in iOS 16, you got access to a whole slew of search-related modifiers. Now, my one caveat here is that some of these modifiers are not totally customizable from a UI perspective, but they look really good and they open us up to a lot of features that would otherwise be really difficult to build. So my recommendation is if you're building any sort of search functionality, adapt your UI to fit the native UI components, because once we use these in our app, it's going to save us so much time as developers. These are incredibly cool, so powerful. In this video, we're going to learn not only how to implement all of these new search-related modifiers, but we're also going to actually just do a real-world example where we build out a data model, an enum, a whole bunch of actual data as if this was a real app. So this is a little bit of a longer video here. But the reason it is because we're going to actually build out a real world use case. I think all these modifiers could have had individual videos, but really at the end of the day, we all want to use these all together to make one seamless search experience. So that's what we're going to learn here. And I highly recommend adapting your search experience to use some of these features, because to have this functionality out of the box in SwiftUI is just amazing. It's literally so fast to whip up a search experience once you understand how these modifiers work.
All right, welcome back everyone. Today we're going to look at several of the new searchable and search-ish modifiers in SwiftUI. iOS 16 gave us these modifiers. They are probably the best way to be doing search in SwiftUI apps. The UI is not super customizable, but it's probably worth it to use it just to save the amount of development time that it would take to build out a similar UI by yourself. Anyway, let's jump into this. A slightly longer video here, so buckle up. Let's right-click the navigator, create a new file, SwiftUI view, of course. What other kind of file would we possibly be doing here? And let's call this one the Searchable Bootcamp. Let's get in here, open the brackets, and you already know that we are going to be using MVVM. Let's do an app main actor, final class. Let's call this Searchable View Model. Conform to observable object. Open the brackets. Let's initialize one in our view. State object, private var, view model. Here we go. All right. We are going to have some sort of data service, of course. So let's create a final class here and let's call this restaurant manager. And you bet it, we are going to be filtering and searching for restaurants in this tutorial. In a lot of my bootcamps, I kind of try to keep the data model super simple, like strings, booleans, so we can do super simple filtering. I think it's worth in this video to actually create a custom data model just to have a little bit of practice with that. So we're going to do some custom enums and a custom struct in this video. Of course, the first struct we're going to make is a restaurant because that's what we're searching for. So let's create a struct and let's call it restaurant. Let's make the struct conform to identifiable so that we can loop on the ID, and let's also make it conform to maybe hashable. So let's open the brackets. All right, every restaurant will have an ID of type string, it will have a title of type string, and it will have a cuisine. Now, cuisine is like the type of food that the restaurant will serve, and we want to create a enum for all of the possible cuisines that are in our app. So let's create an enum here, and we'll call it cuisine option. Open the brackets. So the cuisine, of course, will be type cuisine option. What are the options? We're going to do a case. Let's just keep it simple here. Maybe American food, Italian food, and maybe Japanese food. Get some sushi in there. And in our restaurant manager, we want to create a function that is get all restaurants. All right. This we will mimic pinging the server, so that it will be asynchronous. It will throw and it will return an array of restaurant. But let's just hard code in some restaurants here just for the tutorial. So we're going to return, let's say restaurant, and we'll just give this ID of 1. Maybe we'll say Burger Shack, why not? That sounds pretty American to me. Let's just copy and paste this a few times. So we have 2, 3, and 4. The second one, let's name it Pasta Palace. That sounds Italian, maybe Italian American. I think real Italians would never call it Pasta Palace, but let's go with that. And then of course we need Sushi Heaven, because that will fill our Japanese cuisine. All right, and finally, let's just do some generic, maybe like a local market, like a supermarket or something like that. Feel free to add in whatever restaurants, names, titles, cuisines that you guys want here. The code is not going to be coupled to specific names or cuisines, so you can go ahead and customize this as you want. Let's get a reference to this in our view model here. So we'll say let manager equals restaurant manager. And let's start, before we even do any searching, let's just get all of our basic restaurants on the screen. So we're going to create up here an @published private set. This will be a variable called all restaurants. And we'll make it an array of restaurant, and we'll make it a blank array to start. And then we'll have a function in here called load restaurants. We'll open the brackets, and let's see, we can make it maybe asynchronous, and in here we'll have a do and a catch. We'll print the error, and all restaurants is equal to manager.getAllRestaurants. This is asynchronous, so of course we want to await the results. Let's call this from our view with a super simple task, view model, load restaurants. Let's get them on the screen. So let's add in here a scroll view and a VStack, maybe spacing of 20. Why not? We'll do for each. What are we looping on? View model.allRestaurants, and they are identifiable. So this will be each restaurant in, and then we need some sort of view. I'm going to highlight this and then Control-I just to get the formatting perfect. And let's create a quick little function for what our restaurant row will look like. So we'll create a private func here, call it restaurant row. It will accept a restaurant of type restaurant. Return us some view. And let's keep it simple with a VStack here as well. Alignment of maybe leading, spacing of maybe 10. And we'll put some text on the screen with the restaurant title. Another one with the text of the restaurant dot cuisine. And we want to get the string value of that cuisine. So the cuisine here, we have American, Italian, Japanese. So to get that value of what the actual case is, we need to conform to string, which gives us the raw value of American. So here, this will be the cuisine.raw value. And we'll just make it capitalized since these are all lowercase. We want to capitalize the J, the I, the A here. Cool. Let's give this a font of headline. Let's give this a font of caption. And let's put this on the screen, see what it looks like so far. So a restaurant row, pass in a restaurant. Got to await this result here, and I think we are good to go. Let's see if it works. Cool. We are getting there. I promise in some future videos I will start actually doing like high definition UI. I know most of my boot camps have been like, let's get the logic down, because usually I think that's the hardest part, but I feel like I've been slacking lately on the actual UI. So I'll definitely try to get to some UI videos in the near future. Anyway, let's make this look a little bit better before we move forward. So let's assume that we're going to be inside a navigation stack when we get to the screen. This way we can use a nav title. Let's just say restaurants. And this looks super ugly, so maybe we can give this a frame with a max width of infinity. Align it to the leading edge. Let's give it a background of maybe color, black, opacity 0.05, so it's like a light gray. And let's give it some padding before this so that it pops out. And let's put that whole VStack with some padding so that we're off of the edges. Cool. Got our 4 restaurants here. This looks kind of decent. I will note the reason I'm putting this as a private function here as a restaurant row is because when the UI is super simple, I'll just do this private function here. But if this restaurant row needed its own state, like it needed its own @state variables, it needed its own kind of maybe loading is being done inside the cell, this would be very simple to strip out and create a separate file for this row. So I could have like a restaurant row view and then just pass that in here. So while I'm keeping this here, this setup is super simple for when I want to scale up my app or if this row gets very complicated. It's not going to in this tutorial, but I think this is just like a nice structure to have, at least while developing. All right, so we have our screen set up now, but we didn't do any searching, so we should probably start that now. Let's see here. The first view modifier we're going to look at here, which is super handy dandy, is the Searchable. Straightforward here. There's a couple completions here. Some of them are a little confusing. Look at all these like protocols they have in this one. But we're going to keep it simple here because there's a lot to cover in this video. So I'm just going to keep it simple with the basic text placement prompt. And then we're just going to play around with this for a while. So searchable. And we need to bind to some text. So if you followed my crypto playlist, we built out our own basically search bar. And that took a lot of work. I think the UI came out well, but generally speaking, if there's some native component that can do the searching for me, I would probably prefer that. And in this case, this searchable modifier is giving us that search text field out of the box. So that's what it's asking for here. So instead of creating our own text field and then trying to style it ourselves, we can just add this searchable modifier and bind to the text field that is automatically going to be displayed. Now, as you guys are going to see, this text field is not super customizable. So let's get this going real quick. Let's bind to some text. We're using MVVM, so we should put it into the view model. So up here, I'm going to create a nat published. Private. Actually, it will not be private because we are binding, meaning that this text will set it as well. So it can't be private. So we'll just make it a variable. And we'll say search text of type string, and we'll set it equal to a blank string to start. Let's bind with the $view model. Search text. Placement. I think we're just going to do automatic. I don't think these matter in a iPhone application. I think they're maybe more relevant in like a iPad situation. Let's do automatic for now, and then some placeholder text. We'll just say search restaurants. And just like that, our beautifully looking search bar is right up here. This looks very similar to some of the Apple apps that you might have on your phone, like the email app. This is the search bar. We cannot really customize it, so we are a little bit limited in the UI here, but if you're asking me, I would say that even though the UI might not be exactly what you're hoping for, the amount of like dev time and bugs and issues that this is going to save us, it is most likely worth it to just change our UI to support this search bar if you can. It's at least my gut reaction here. And just to prove that, like, look at this. When I click on this, it animates up really nicely. We get this cancel button, which works perfectly. Also, if I scroll up, it has this nice kind of collapse effect, which goes really well. It's very, very smooth. If you had to build this out yourself, it would take you a very long time to even just build this little collapsible effect here. And we can also even just make the nav title display mode inline, which also gives us a cool UI where the search bar is just baked in at the top from the start, and it still has that collapsible effect. So either of these looks really good. It's really powerful that this just comes out of the box in SwiftUI at this point. But of course, when we type in here, nothing is happening. So we need to add some of our own logic for how to actually search on this search bar. All right, let's go back up to our view model here. Now we're going to actually use Combine a little bit here just because async algorithms is still relatively new, and I really want to use the debounce feature, which is in the async algorithm package, but I don't think it's released yet. I don't know if it's like stable, and I don't want to try to use code that I would not put in a production app at this point. So If you've followed any of my other courses on Combine, on searching, on the crypto app, we've done kind of this setup before. We're going to subscribe to this search text publisher, and then when it changes, we are going to update some array with the actual restaurants that are the result of the search text. In order to do that, let's create an init here, and then let's create a private function called add subscribers. Open the brackets. We'll call this from our init. So as soon as we initialize our view model, we will add subscribers, and we're going to subscribe to the search text. So we're going to use the $sign to access the published value inside the property wrapper of this search text. So not the current value, but the publisher, so that every time the search text changes, this search text subscriber will get that change. So if I type in A, this will get a publish of A. If I type in AB, this will get a publish of AB, and so on. Now, when the user is searching, right, they're going to probably type a bunch of characters pretty quickly. And if, depending on what logic you have in here, it might be a relatively heavy process to actually like filter on all of the restaurants for every single keystroke that the user makes. So if they type in, they're going for burger and they type in BURG, realistically, we probably don't need to update the filter until the user kind of stops typing. And the way we do that in code is by adding a debounce. So if we didn't have a debounce, it would say every time that this search text gets updated, so every single character, we're going to perform some action. The debounce is saying, let's wait for 0.3 seconds after the most recent publish to actually perform the action. So if the user is typing really quickly, the chances are each character is going to be within 0.3 seconds. So this function won't execute until they kind of stop typing. And this generally is like a best practice for dealing with search. Let's put this on the dispatch queue.main, and we don't need any options. And real simply, we're just going to sync when we get this value. So user stops typing, 0.3 seconds later, we're going to get the search text here. And we can just make this a weak reference for now. And what do we want to do when we actually get the new search text? We want to create a private func here called filter restaurants. And we're going to pass in search text of type string. And so here we'll call self.filter restaurants with the new search text. And we need to store this subscriber somewhere so that we hold a reference to it. And again, we're using Combine, so we need to import the Combine framework. We'll create a private var called cancellables, which will be a set of any cancelable. And now we can just store our subscriber into that set of cancellables. All right, now we're going to get this filtered restaurants function, this search text here, and we want to update something. Now, it is important, I've seen some people do this in our Discord. When we are searching, generally we want to hold the all restaurants array separate from our filtered restaurants array. Because all restaurants, once we have loaded all of the restaurants, we don't want to remove the reference for all of those restaurants in case the user changes their search result. So what I'm going to do is create a second array here and call this filtered restaurants, which will also be an array of restaurant. So this will basically be like a subset of all restaurants based on whatever the user is searching. Okay, and now in our function here, firstly, let's check if there is actually text inside search text. So if the user is typing something, there will be search text. But if they go back down to 0, this publish will come through with an empty string. So let's say guard search text is empty. And we're going to check that the search text is not empty. And if it's not empty, we'll continue down here. But if it is empty, we're going to catch this guard statement and we'll return out of the function. If it is empty, let's also set our filtered restaurants back to an empty array, just so that we know we have nothing filtered on. Sorry, we need an else here. My bad, guys. And now if it is not empty, we're going to actually filter on it. So here we will set the filtered restaurants equal to all restaurants, which is the array that we started with, which is all 4 of our restaurants. And we will filter on the restaurants. So for each restaurant, we're going to add in now some custom search logic. So obviously our restaurants have title, but they also have cuisine. And if the user is searching, I want to include both of those inside the search results. So if the user searches for ITA, Italian should also come up as true. If the user searches for like PAL, the name should come up or the cuisine should come up. And we're going to do that in here. Firstly, let's say let search, and we'll set it equal to the search text lowercase. When we're doing searching and filtering, it's generally good practice to make everything lowercase. This way you don't have like case sensitive search, which is not a great user experience. So we'll say let title contains search. We'll set this equal to if the restaurant.title contains search. Now we might actually have a bug in here because this title might be capitalized, right? And so really we want to make sure that the search is lowercase, but also the string that we're looking in is also lowercase. And then secondly, we're going to say let cuisine contains search. And we'll look at the restaurant.cuisine.raw value. We'll do lowercase. It is lowercase already, but let's just be safe in case, I don't know, some weirdness happens. And if that contains search, so we're going to return the restaurants where the title contains the search or the cuisine contains the search. So if either of those match, it will return true. All right, so this should be, let's see, this is connected. This will do the filtering. This is the correct filter. Now, if I go and type, we notice the UI is not updating, and that is because the UI here is looking at viewModel.allRestaurants. It's not looking at viewModel.filteredRestaurants. And so we want to have a little bit of a UI here so that if the user is actively searching, we look at the filtered. But if they're not searching, we have that starting state here where we actually have all restaurants on the screen. So in order to do that, let's create some sort of computed variable called isSearching. We'll give it a Boolean, and we'll just say search text is empty. And so if the search text is not empty, meaning there is text inside that search bar here, then isSearching is true. So down here, let's update our UI. We'll say, let's change this little bit of code here. So we're going to loop on, if the view model is searching, we will loop on the viewModel.filteredRestaurants. Otherwise, if we're not searching, viewModel.allRestaurants. All right, now I'm going to start typing, and if I type in burger, Burger Shack comes up. Awesome. If I type in pasta, if I type in Italian, these are all working perfectly. So we have our basic search working, and I don't think that was too difficult. This is a pretty cool, like it wouldn't be much more work to make this UI look really, really nice. Before we move forward, I want to point out something here. So this isSearching is kind of the way that I've been doing it in my app. There is also an isSearching value that we can get from the environment in SwiftUI. So I want to show it to you, although I'm not going to actually use it. I'm going to create a child view here, and let's just call this struct, just call it search child view for a second. It'll be a view. Every view needs a body, and we're just going to say text, maybe child view is searching, and we will just put in, we need a Boolean here. So what we're going to do is pull this value out of the environment. So the same way we have like the dismiss in SwiftUI or like the presentation mode, we have an at environment value of let's do a \isSearching, and we'll make this a private var and call it isSearching. And we'll just put that on the screen here with a description. I'm going to put this search child view, let's just put it at the bottom of the UI here. isSearching is false. I'm also going to put a quick text here that says view model is searching. And let's just put in the view model is searching description. Okay, they're both false, but I want to point this out here that if I click onto this text field, we can see that the child view is searching is true. So the SwiftUI environment is registering that any focus on this text field. So when I click onto the text field, it is technically searching, although our custom logic is basically if I start typing, it is searching, right? So I had to type in order to get this true here. I just wanted to bring this up because depending on your app, you might want one or the other. The kind of limitation of this isSearching is that it is pulling from the environment. So if we put this inside this view itself, the environment is like the parent of the view. So it wouldn't actually work. And so it needs to be a child view. So depending on your UI, that might work, that might not work. Generally, I'm using this custom version that I have here, but you got to do what is best for your app. Just wanted to show it to you guys. Let's comment that out. And let's start diving into some of the more fancy modifiers that we've gotten in iOS 16 for searching. So another pretty cool modifier, let's put it below the searchable, is the .search scopes, search scopes here. And we're going to look at, we're just going to use this first completion here. So we need to bind to some sort of current scope. Search scopes sort of like a filter. Now, of course, we can build out our own filter, our own menu. I did that in the Firebase Bootcamp. We kind of built out our own kind of filter buttons. That was basically just because I didn't cover this yet. Again, the UI is going to be a little bit limited here. We'll look at that in a second. But in order to actually use these search scopes, we need to bind to basically our current filtered scope. And then we need to give it what scopes to actually display. So let's come up here at the top here. And what are these search scopes that we want? Well, this is a little confusing if you haven't done something like this before. We want our search scopes, our filters basically, to be all of these cuisines. But we also want one scope for maybe all cuisines. So that if we click it, we can go back to all cuisines. And what we could do is make an all case here, but that would then make all one type of cuisine. And we all know that all is not actually cuisine. So what we're going to do is really create a second enum that is either one of these or all. We're going to do that by creating a custom enum here. I think this is good practice. I haven't done something like this very often on my channel. Let's create a search scope option. And again, it's either going to be all or it's going to be one of those cuisines. Now, if it is one of those cuisines, we need to inject and tell it which of those options it's going to be. So we'll pass in a cuisine option into this case. Now, each of these options, we're going to have to display it on the screen. So we need some sort of like text to describe what each of these cuisines and all are. So let's give it a local title here of type string, and let's switch on self. So if self is all, the title will be all. And if self is cuisine, let's get what that cuisine is by saying let option, that's the cuisine, and we will just return the option dot raw value, which we made earlier in the video, and we'll just capitalize it just so that we have, again, the capital A-I-J. Cool. So now I have my search scope option. Firstly, we need to tell the UI which is the current one that we are connected to. So up here, I'm going to create, let's do it here so that it's, because it's another published, we'll do an @published var search scope. Oh, I can't type. Of type search scope option, we'll start with all. And so let's bind to this now from our view, the $view model search scope. And then I need an array of all of the scopes that I want to show on the screen here. So let's come up here, and what we're going to do is make an array up here. So we're going to say @published private set var all search scopes, which will be an array of search scope option, and we'll set it equal to a blank array to start. And what we're going to do is when we actually get our restaurants, so down here, we added a function to load restaurants, right? And we get all restaurants. And what we're going to do is when we get all restaurants, we're going to first, let's say, let all cuisines equals all restaurants dot map. And literally in this update and in this new update of Xcode, it's literally like inferring what we're about to do. We're going to map all restaurants to their cuisine. So let's just press enter on that. That was pretty funny that came right up. Now, if we think about this logically, if we have a long list of restaurants, 1,000 restaurants, there's going to be multiple restaurants with the same cuisine. So this array right now could have like Italian 5 times, Japanese 10 times. And so what we want to do is filter that array down to so that it's unique values. So if it is Italian a bunch of times, we want basically an array with just Italian once. And the fastest way to do that in Swift is to just turn this array into a set. So right now, again, it is an array, but we're just going to very simply cast the array as a set. A set is just a unique array, basically. So now we can see that it's a set of cuisine options, so everything in there will be unique. And now we're just going to set up this array here with all of our scopes. And our scopes are going to be all plus all of the cuisines in our restaurants. So let's do it real quick. We'll say all search scopes equals. Firstly, let's get an array of just the all case, and then we'll add it to an array of all of the cuisines. So right now these cuisines are of type cuisine option, but we want to turn them into search scope option. So we will say plus all cuisines dot map them, and we will map them into, let's say this will be the option, and we will map it into a search scope option dot cuisine, and we'll pass in the option. All right. A shorthand way to do this line of code would be map, and we'll do search scope option dot cuisine, and the $ is 0, representing each option that we are looping on. So I'm going to keep the shorthand here just because it's a little bit less code. Now we have all search scopes, which is all plus all of the cuisines that are in our restaurants. The reason we're doing it this way is because there could be cases where there's a bunch of cuisines in our app that are maybe not included in our all restaurants fetch, right? So maybe we have some edge case in our app where like we have this cuisine of Japanese, but when we fetched all restaurants, right, there was no Japanese. And in that case, we wouldn't want to show a filter to the user that would then return 0 results. So by first starting with the array of restaurants and then figuring out which filters to add kind of saves us that edge case. All right, coming down here now, let's update our UI. So we need to give it what are the scopes, and those scopes are going to be for each viewModel.all search scopes, and this will be each scope in. We're just going to make these simple with a text that says scope.title. Remember, this title is the title that we set up here in our search scope option. So it's going to be all or the option capitalized. And all search scopes is an array of search scope option, which in order to loop on it, these need to be hashable. And then down here, let's loop on the ID, the hash ID of each item. Cool. If I start typing now in my search bar, I can see these search scopes come up here, which is really nice. So I have all, I have American, I have Italian, I have Japanese. And it is exactly what we were looking for. Again, I'm going to note here that this UI is a bit limited. I don't know a way to customize this UI here. And so if you have a ton of search results, it can get really congested in here. So there's definitely limitations. It's a really nice UI, like for not a lot of code. I like this. I don't know if it is totally usable in every use case though. Of course, when we are clicking these, nothing is happening, and that's because 2 reasons. Firstly, we need to update our filtered array. Secondly, we need to update the actual selected search scope. So the selected search scope is this viewModel.searchScope. And in order to actually, when we click on one of these, it updates the search scope, we need to give this a tag. This is just like if we have a tab bar in SwiftUI and we have to give each tab a tag. Here we have to give each scope a tag, and the tag is going to be the scope itself. So now when I click on one of these, the actual search scope here should get updated to American, Italian, Japanese. The last problem is that when this search scope gets updated, we need to update our filtered restaurants, right? And so right now we are subscribing to the search text, but we should also subscribe to changes on the search scope. So using our handy dandy combine modifiers, we're going to combine. So we're going to listen to the search text. We're also going to listen to the search scope. All right. So if either of these get a publish, we're going to come down into the sync. So the sync is going to give us the search text and also the search scope. And we should take that into account when we filter restaurants. So our function for filter restaurants, let's also add a search scope of type search scope option. Let's pass that in. Okay, so if we are not searching filtered restaurants as a blank array, let's also set the search scope back to all. You're going to notice here that search scope is actually white. It's not green. That's because it's actually referencing this search scope, but we want to reference the one at the top of the screen, which is self.searchScope. So this one up here. To make that a little clearer, I can also just change this, maybe like current search scope. So now I don't have to reference self because the only search scope is the one at the top of the view model. We'll set search scope equal to all. Update this. All right, now we have these search scopes, but if the user has clicked on one of them, we want to make sure that instead of looking at all of the restaurants, we only want to look at the restaurants that are inside that scope, right? So if user clicks on Italian and then we're searching for restaurants within the Italian, we want to make sure that it's not all restaurants, it's just the Italian ones. And then we're going to do that firstly is updating this array before we search on it. So down here, we are going to filter on the search text, but up here, we're going to filter on the search scope. So firstly, let's get the array as is. So we'll say var restaurants in scope, set it equal to all restaurants. And then let's switch on the current search scope. So this is the current search scope that's coming through the publisher here. If it is all, of course, restaurants in scope is already all restaurants. So we can just break. We don't need to do anything if it's all. If it is a specific cuisine, let's change the restaurants in scope to equal all restaurants dot filter. And we're going to filter for the restaurant. We're going to return where the restaurant dot cuisine is equal to the option that we are searching for here. So the option meaning, if I click on Italian, if the cuisine is Italian, and that's how we're going to filter on our restaurants. A shorthand way of doing this is going to be filter for, open the brackets here, if the restaurant, so $0, the item that we are looping on is each restaurant inside this array, if the restaurant.cuisine is equal to the option in the scope. All right, and now all we're going to do is take restaurants in scope, this array here, and just use that when we do our search down here. Cool. I'm going to look at my UI real quick. Let's start clicking on this. I'm going to start typing. I typed in A, so we still have A is included in all 4 of these cases. But if I click on Italian, it's only going to show me the Italian ones, the American ones, the Japanese ones, and we can go back to all. And I think that's really cool. And I think that's a really nice UI. I really like the way that our code is laid out here. It's very clean. It's easy to read and update. And the last thing I want to show you guys before we wrap up this video is the search suggestions. So arguably, there is a case where you would say maybe not to use search suggestions and search scopes inside the same UI, because there's definitely some overlap between the two, as you're going to see. But we're going to put both in this view, just obviously because we're getting some good practice, right? All right, this next modifier is search suggestions. And I'm going to look for just the basic suggestions here and click enter. And just to show you what it is before we get into it, I'm going to put a text here that says, hello world. Right now, when I click on the search bar, I see all of the suggestions here. So if I put a bunch of these, I can get a bunch of suggestions. This is kind of the UI you've seen on like Instagram or TikTok. As soon as you start the search on the explore page, right, there, you might have like your recent searches or like recent profiles you've clicked on. These would be your search suggestions. So Apple is giving us a way to build that UI out of the box. Now, again, if I didn't have this and I clicked on this, I can still see my restaurants here without the search suggestions like taking over the screen. So there's a case where you might want this. There's a case where you might not want this. Let's go ahead and build some actual search suggestions for the UI of our app right now. And what I'm going to do is up here in our view model, let's create a func called get search suggestions. Open the brackets, and this will return us an array of string. Now, suggestions are generally exactly what you think they are. They're suggestions for what the user might be searching. So for example, if I start typing maybe like ITA, there's a chance I'm searching for Italian, right? And so you could have some really complex logic to try to figure out what the user is actually searching for. We're going to keep this as simple as we can for now because, of course, we're not building some crazy search engine here. But let's just call this, let's create a temporary array called suggestions. And we'll make it an array of string, set it equal to a blank array. And let's just do some like manual logic here. So firstly, let's let the search text equal search equals the search text dot lowercase. So this function is going to trigger every time that this view gets updated, which is basically every time the user types a character. And so if the search text, we'll say if the search text search contains, so maybe if they're typing like PA, maybe we think that PA is, how users start to type for pasta very often on our app, right? So we could add the suggestion, we'll append maybe pasta. Okay, so if search contains PA, suggestions will include pasta. And we're going to copy that a couple times here. So let's do maybe 1, 2, 3. If they start typing, what else do we have? SU, maybe they're searching for sushi. If they're typing BU, maybe they're searching for burger. If they type, and then maybe there's some like default ones, right? So like maybe every user, it's really common for users to search for, I don't know, the market or the grocery. And so we can just have some default suggestions as well. And then maybe we also have a really common case where users are searching for maybe some of the cuisines that are in our app. So maybe we'll add some like basic suggestions for maybe some popular cuisines. So we'll do like a cuisine option of maybe, what do we have? Italian, raw value, capitalized, and let's just do, Japanese and American. And then let's just return these suggestions from our function. All right, down here in our search suggestions, let's loop on those suggestions. So we'll say for each view model.search suggestions, get search suggestions, which is an array of strings. So we need to loop on the hash ID of each string, and this will be each suggestion. And then we can put that on the screen here, suggestion. Cool. So now if I click on this, I have all of these really cool suggestions. Of course, in the ones we added, we don't see pasta or sushi because we didn't start typing. But if I start typing PA, now pasta is one of our suggestions, right? So this could get really handy if users are typing really unique things and you want to save them the time from actually typing it all out. So if I'm starting typing PA and then I see pasta pop up, I can click on it and then it would search for pasta. So in order to do that, if I click on it right now, nothing's going to happen. But if I come down here, and we could even look at the documentation for search suggestions, I can add in a search completion. So the search completion, when I click on that suggestion, will be the suggestion itself. So in here, right, if I come in here and I click on the Italian, instead of having to type it in Italian, I can just click on it and it pops right up. Another one, for example, maybe I started typing like sushi, and then sushi pops up. I can click that and it will update into the search bar here. Cool. We have some UI issues though, right? If I click on sushi, we should see the search results for sushi. We should not see the search suggestions still. And there's a couple ways to do this depending on how you want to do it in your app. One case might be that when we actually click on one of these, we segue to another screen. So instead of having a search completion, we could have a function that actually goes to the next screen that shows us maybe all of the search results for sushi. I don't want to really build that out right now. So what we're going to do is basically say if the search text is greater than maybe 3 characters, we'll hide the suggestions and we'll just let the user finish whatever they're typing. So one way to do that will be like up here, we'll create a variable called maybe var show search suggestions, also a Boolean. And we'll just say if the search text dot count, so if there's less than 3 characters, we'll show the search suggestions. So coming down here, search suggestions. So coming back, actually, let's do it in our function here. Firstly, before we actually add any suggestions, let's just say maybe guard show search suggestions. So make sure so search suggestions is true, else if it is not true, return a blank array. And so if there's a blank array, no suggestions should show. So if I click on this, we get our search suggestions. If I click on Italian, show search suggestions should turn false, and they go away and we're back to my actual UI. So now I can start typing in like sushi, I can click on sushi, and then all the sushi restaurants come up. Again, a nice little UI here. Because we have the Italian, Japanese, American here, we kind of don't need it here as well. So I would probably do one of these or the other, probably not both of them. But this search suggestions is more powerful, I would say, not for completions, but for like recents, right? On Instagram, you have all the recent profiles you searched. That's probably like the primary use case of this UI. The last thing, we'll wrap up this video with just some basic segues because I recently covered the navigation stack on my channel. And so we could update our UI pretty quickly. So like Burger Shack, Pasta Palace, maybe when we click on these, we want to go to the next screen. So one way to do that in the UI would be to have a navigation stack, which we're already inside. Then we can add in a .navigation destination for a restaurant. And this will be the restaurant. Let's just go to a screen that has the text with the restaurant .title .uppercased. Why not? All right, so if I click on one of these, I want to go to this next screen. So let's update our restaurant row to actually be a navigation link where the value is the restaurant. If you don't know how to use these navigation links with the value, I did a whole video on it very recently on how to use the navigation stack. The label of this, of course, will still be our restaurant row. These change to blue because that's the tint color by default of the navigation link. We can always change the color of that by just changing like the foreground color of the text, right? We could do a foreground color of red, or we could change the tint color, maybe back to primary, something like that. All right, so now if I click on Burger Shack, we go to the Burger Shack screen. If I click on Sushi Heaven, we go to the Sushi Heaven screen. Another way that we might want to kind of finish this off is maybe our search suggestions also have some restaurant suggestions rather than search completions. So here, these are search suggestions. Let's also create a function here, get restaurant suggestions. This returns us an array of restaurant. And what we're going to do is maybe copy this function and paste it here. But let's update it so that it returns us an array of restaurant. All right, so if the user is searching for maybe ITA for like Italian, maybe suggestions.append, and maybe we append maybe all restaurants, filter where the cuisine is equal to Italian. And maybe we do the same thing for Japanese. And let's just leave that as that for now because this video is getting kind of long. And we'll just return these suggestions. And this is actually an array, so we can't just append, we need to append contents of this array. And same thing here. This will be Japanese. And let's do one more loop down here. In our search suggestions, put this here, get restaurant suggestions. This will be the suggestion dot title of the restaurant. And we don't want to do a search completion here. Instead, we're going to do a navigation link like we have above for the restaurant, for the suggestion. and we'll put in that text. So now if I click on this and I type in ITA, and I just realized that this is now 3 characters. So we should actually update our function here. Maybe it's less than 5 characters, for example. All right, now I can come up here and I can search. And if I type in ITA, I get all of my Italian restaurants in the search suggestions. So if I click on one of these, American or Italian one, it's going to update my search here on this screen. But if I go here and I type in ITA and I click on Pasta Palace, it'll go straight to Pasta Palace. So on Instagram, when you get the suggestion for like a recent profile, it's going straight to the user's profile versus a search completion. And this UI can handle both of those cases. All right, that was a lot to cover. This was kind of a difficult video, but I hope it helps somebody. Search and filter is a very core part of your app, and the logic can get really confusing really quickly. So I think this is I hope that at least this is a good setup. Maybe cleared some confusion for some of you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, thank you for watching. As always, I am Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.